Part 53. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 521. Chapter 521, Why don't you please me first? This time the whole family came to accompany me. The two of them glanced at Luz's who and complained in their hearts, you don't have to say this. However, since Luz's who had not forgotten them in front of his wife, the two of them smiled at him and promised. There were too many people outside. Zhang Wanan leaned against the window and watched Luz's who. After walking a short distance, he lost sight of his back and could only see the moving heads. She sat down and looked at the dessert in front of her and sighed. Luz's who couldn't eat it? Anan, why don't you eat? Lin 11 looked at her and asked. Zhang Wanan shook his head and glanced out the window twice as he spoke, I don't want to eat it. Lin 11 knew from the look in her eyes that she was missing Luz's who and would only leave for a while. Lin 11 wanted to laugh when she saw her eager look. She used to stand by the window like this when she and Lu Lin got married, waiting for him to get off work. It is estimated that Zhang Wanan's mood at this time is the same as her mood at that time. Just don't bother her. Lu Lin came out with work to accompany Luz's who for the exam. He had been processing documents since he sat down and barely said a few words. Lin 11 finally relaxed and rested in this way, and her mobile phone became the treasure in her hand. Zhang Wanan was not idle either and kept staring out the window. She also kept an eye on the time. When the time came, she would stand up to remind her, which was even more punctual than the school bell. Asterisk. Luz's who finally finished the exam in 2 days. After 3 years of hard work in high school, the 2-day exam will give you the final result. After the exam, Luz's who only had to wait for the results to come out. He was confident and not in a hurry. He still lived a leisurely and comfortable life. But now he is more willing to stick to Zhang Wanan than before. Maybe it's because I know that I will have to go far away after school starts. They were on vacation after their exams, but Zhang Wanan was still studying hard at school. So Luz's who started running to school every day, and he was more active than when he was in school. Sometimes he would take Zhang Wanan out for a meal at noon. After he graduated, the teacher had no control over who he fell in love with, but Zhang Wanan was still at school, so they still acted cautiously at the school gate. Luz's who was waiting at the door again after school was over at noon. They had a specially agreed place, and Zhang Wanan knew where to find him as soon as he came out. Zhang Wanan jumped out to look for Luz's who that day, but when he looked over from a distance, he saw that Luz's who's face was gloomy. Zhang Wanan raised her head and looked at the sky. Well, it looked like the weather today. Perhaps Luz's who is somewhat related to God. She paused and looked at Luz's who from a distance, seeing that he seemed very unhappy. She wondered if she would be unlucky soon. After thinking for a while, she thought that she might as well go back to the school cafeteria for a meal. She hadn't eaten there for a long time. So Zhang Wanan was about to turn around, but the person on the other side seemed to have seen through it before she made a move, and called her name coldly, and then walked towards her. Zhang Wanan knew she couldn't run away, so she stood there obediently, but she couldn't figure out what she had done wrong. Perhaps it's not her fault. But Luz's whose uncle is here. Yes, that must be the case, Zhang Wanan thought with a bit of blind confidence. Luz's who came over and stood in front of her. He made no movement or expression, and looked at her condescendingly with a straight face. Zhang Wanan felt a sense of oppression. No matter what, it's better to please her first. If it's her fault later, it will be easier to escape, Zhang Wanan thought. What's wrong, Xiao Jojo? Zhang Wanan looked up at him with a smile, her eyes widening with smiles. Luz's who stared at her expressionlessly and asked, what do you think? I said. Zhang Wanan lowered his head and muttered. Was it really her fault? But why doesn't she know? End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 522. Chapter 522. I'm looking for someone to keep an eye on you, I said. Jongwanan lowered his head and muttered. Was it really her fault? But why doesn't she know? Confused. What's wrong with me? Jongwanan raised her head again and looked at Lu Zizhu's stern face in confusion. This man is good at everything, but he is a bit unpredictable. Alas, she is too difficult. Just now, you had a lot of fun with Zhang Baihui just now. Lu Zizhu felt a little awkward when he said it. Just now, Jiang Baihui, Jongwanan muttered twice more. Well, I'm very happy. Lu Zizhu emphasized the pronunciation of the word very happy very strongly. Are you peeking? Jongwanan asked in surprise after realizing it. It's not peeking, it's just across a railing, so it's not peeking. He explained that this was why it was a bit awkward for him to ask just now. They had just taken a physical education class and were playing games. She was in the same group as Zhang Baihui. She might have laughed too heartily, which made Lu Zizhu jealous. Jongwanan took a deep breath and covered her nose with her hands. Tisk, 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 did you hear it? It seems like someone's jealousy has been overturned. Lu Zizhu was speechless. Jongwanan saw that his expression was not very good. She turned around and looked around. There was no one there. She turned around and naturally took Lu Zizhu's arm and led him away. Oh, don't be jealous. Although I smiled happily, all I was thinking about at the time was you. I was wondering if you would be tired standing outside waiting for me. It was all a fake smile, Jongwanan said. In fact, what she said was against her will. It was true that she missed Lu Zizhu, but she mainly wanted to where Lu Zizhu would take her to eat. Lu Zizhu listened to her words with hesitation. This little girl was getting better and better at telling lies, and he couldn't tell the truth from the lie anymore. You're going the wrong way, go over there to eat, Lu Zizhu said. Jongwanan stood there in shock and was furious. Her attitude was nowhere near the patience she had when she was trying to coax Lu Zizhu. Why didn't you tell me earlier? She said angrily. I'm listening to you, and my upbringing tells me not to interrupt others, Lu Zizhu explained seriously. Jongwanan rolled her eyes helplessly and led Lu Zizhu to turn around and walk in the opposite direction. Lu Zizhu rubbed her head as if it was smoothing her hair. Don't get too close to Jiang Baihui after I leave, Lu Zizhu said after walking for a short distance. I'm not worried, Lu Zizhu added. The little girl is very innocent. What should I do if someone takes her away? Jongwanan suddenly smiled. She was worried about this childish guy and would be disliked for being childish. She didn't expect that he was more childish than herself. Anyway, you left and didn't know what I was doing, so I still want to get close to him. Jongwanan was particularly angry with him, raising her head and saying as if she needed a beating. I'm looking for someone to keep an eye on you, Lu Zizhu said immediately. Who are you looking for? Jongwanan asked. I won't tell you who to look for, Lu Zizhu said a little proudly. The two men looked like they were in need of a beating when they talked, and their nostrils were about to shoot up. Tch, I did it secretly. Jongwanan was still angry at him. Then I will break Zhang Baihui's legs, Lu Zizhu said fiercely. You're being unreasonable, Jongwanan asked anxiously, is this guy so extreme? Then I'll beat you, Lu Zizhu glared at her. Jongwanan was stunned. That's not possible. She can't be beaten. What if her face is disfigured? No. She immediately changed her face and said with a smile to please, I'll be good and wait for you to come back to see me. Lu Zizhu nodded with satisfaction, smiled and rubbed her head again. That's right, be good. He, a fickle man, he can change his face faster than turning the pages of a book. Little did he know that she could change her face just as quickly, and they looked exactly the same. As expected, birds of a feather flock together and people divide into groups. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 523. Chapter 523, Earthy Love Words. As expected, birds of a feather flock together and people divide into groups. Jongwon has been a glutton these days. She went to bed early last night, and Luzes who sat next to her reading a book, watching the muttering coming from the side. I want to eat sushi, sushi. These were the words Jongwon said in his sleep, accompanied by the sound of his lips squeaking. Luzes who was speechless for a moment. He once thought that the little girl might be pretending to be asleep, and then told him what she wanted to eat in a subtle way. However, he still kept it in mind silently, so he would bring her to eat today. When Jongwon walked into the store, he showed a very happy expression and a little surprised. I was eating sushi in my dream yesterday. You didn't come into my dream, right? Luzes who nodded. I enter your dreams every day. When I go to T-City, please don't close the windows at night, otherwise I won't be able to enter your dreams. Jongwon was stunned for a moment. Is this a rustic love talk? Does Luzes who know how to talk about love in a local way? Surprised, shocked. Tisk, when you grow up, you can speak earthy love words better than he Chiu. Jongwon praised him. Luzes whose ears were filled with excitement. He found it while he was bored watching videos while waiting for Jongwon today. He didn't expect to use it now, so he learned it in vain. But, he Chiu would have said what the hell? To whom? Who did he Chiu tell this to? Luzes who asked. Suchiao, alas, they too are making trouble every day. He Chiu keeps talking about earthy love words and whispers in Jiao's ears every day. Jiao is tired and says that his ears are about to get calluses. Jongwon said. Suchiao complained a lot in the past 2 days, because he Chiu was always nervous, and sometimes when he was ill, he would hook up with Zhongbai and say a few local love words. A big man in Zhongbai was embarrassed by what he said every day. Luzes who said Tisk, he Chiu and Suchiao will definitely have some stories in the future. Don't be envious of others. If you like it, I will learn more. From now on. Luzes who thought for a while and said. Jongwon cannot be envied by others. She deserves what others have. Jongwon smiled. I'm not envious. Everything Luzes who said to her felt like love words, except for scolding her and calling her stupid. Luzes who knew that she was afraid that she would be embarrassed to say it, but if she said a few words that it was okay, she would be thicker-skinned in the future. Jongwon was really hungry for sushi. She ate a lot in this meal, even more than Luzes who. She felt a little embarrassed after eating, but she didn't feel embarrassed anymore when she thought that she sometimes ate more than Luzes who in the past. Actually, it's not bad. Luzes who doesn't dislike her anyway, she doesn't weigh much, and Luzes who can still hold her. Luzes who, when I have a vacation, when your grades come out and you fill out your application, let's go out and play, Jongwon said after wiping her mouth. Luzes whose mouth twitched. Sure enough, he wanted to play after eating. It would be time to go to bed soon. Where do you want to go? Luzes who asked. Jongwon thought for a while. Let's go to the seaside. The seaside is fun, the sea is full of water. Jongwon giggled again after saying this. This girl is hopeless. Okay, Luzes who said. Then shall we go with our parents or our friends? Jongwon asked again. Luzes who shook his head. Don't count on it, parents. My parents have already made arrangements, and Aunt Tang is going to go somewhere else. Jongwon thought the same thing. Then with my friends. Chiao, he Chiu, Gu Jinchu, Zhang. Okay, that's it. Luzes who interrupted before she could finish saying the name Jiangbei. He completely forgot what he had just said. My upbringing tells me not to interrupt others. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 524. Chapter 524. The money is ready and waiting. Okay, that's it. Loses who interrupted before she could finish saying the name Jiangbei. He completely forgot what he had just said. My upbringing tells me not to interrupt others. Okay, I know you can't tolerate Zhang Baihui in your eyes, Zhang Wanan said helplessly. These two people are in conflict. Loses who nodded, not allowing even a grain of sand in his eyes. I just don't know if they are going or not. After Zhang Wanan finished speaking, he held his chin and felt worried. They are happy to play, and they are even more happy to be away from their parents, Loses who said. He has long understood these people, they are playful and want to stay away from their parents. Zhang Wanan nodded as soon as he thought about it. I'll go to school and tell them later, brother Jinchu. Go and tell them, Zhang Wanan said. Loses who nodded in agreement. You are not allowed to call me brother Gu Jinchu, just call me by your first name, Loses who reminded again. I know, brothers is who. Zhang Wanan pursed her lips and smiled. Just heard Loses who let out a soft hum. She hadn't called him brothers as who for an unknown amount of time, but when she called him out, she felt a little bit bad about it. She didn't know what was going on. After eating and sitting for a while, Loses who sent Zhang Wanan to the school gate, touched her head and said, I'll pick you up in the afternoon. Zhang Wanan nodded and skipped into the school gate. Loses who watched her enter the school gate until she was out of sight before preparing to leave. But before she could turn around, a hand came from behind. Loses who was surprised and turned his head to look over. It was Lao Lu, the student science teacher, the one who caught the two of them falling in love. Loses who turned his head and called teacher respectfully. Lao Lu smiled and nodded, putting away his usually stern side at school. He glanced towards the school gate, raised his chin and said, Are you here to send your little girlfriend to school? Yeah, Loses who responded lightly. Okay, it's good, no points. We won't split it up. I'll ask you to have a wedding banquet later, Loses who said directly. Lao Lu smiled at him, a subtle smile. Okay, the teacher's money is ready and waiting, the little girl has talent, I guess you will be the next one. Lao Lu was referring to Zhang Wanan's rapid progress. Loses who sneered coldly in his heart, thinking that this is not the time you said she was delaying me before, haha. She worked very hard and she earned it all by herself, Loses who said. You must be very helpful. Loses who nodded, but he didn't help much. If Zhang Wanan wasn't willing to learn, then it would be useless no matter how much he helped. As expected, your grades will not be bad this time. Have you decided where to go? Lao Lu turned the topic to him again. Nanda, Loses who said without hesitation. Lao Lu was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Loses who to choose there. Although the school was good, Loses who deserved to go to a better university. After all, his impressive results were there. Lao Lu knew very well that he had selfish motives for going to Nanda. He did not interfere too much. He just patted Loses who on the shoulder and said, It's good. Let's develop well. I'd like to lend you auspicious words. The two chatted for a while. Lao Lu looked at the time. It was almost time for class and he had to walk away. The two of them were very fast and quickly agreed to go out for fun. Everyone they wanted to date was invited, except Zhang Baihui, who Loses who was not allowed to date. Asterisk. The whole family was squatting next to the computer on the night when the results were due, and everyone seemed more nervous than the person involved, Loses who. Loses who comforted them, It's okay. Don't be nervous. Sit down and crack melon seeds for a while, and then check again after a while. Otherwise, there will be too many people in there and you won't be able to get in. It's really tiring to comfort these people even though I'm the one checking my scores. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 525. Chapter 525. I'll be at your house tomorrow. It's really tiring to comfort these people even though I'm the one checking my scores. If you want to eat melon seeds, you have to crush them yourself, Lin 11 said and pushed him aside, thinking that he was not worried about his own results. Luzes, who looked confused. He told the truth. If he checked when the time came, he would definitely not be able to get in because there were too many people. Listen to me and check again in more than half an hour. I'm confident, Luzes, who couldn't help but persuaded again. You should stay away, it's so messy and chattering, Lin 11 said directly in disgust. Okay, just leave. Anyway, he doesn't care much about his grades. He knows very well what he will get in the exam. Anan, come and sit. Where to sit? Sit by yourself. Even Zhangwanan disliked him. He sat speechlessly to one side and stayed away from them. There was no common language for the time being, and he was also disliked. He would sit back later. Actually, there are still 10 minutes left before the time to check the results, but I don't know why they are squatting beside the computer so eagerly now. Even Lulin, who is busy with everything, came over early. They became even more nervous when there were 5 minutes left before the results were checked. Suddenly, a pleasant cell phone ringtone rang. The whole family was frightened. Only Luzes, who was not affected and sat there with his eyes closed to relax. My cell phone. Zhangwanan raised her hand awkwardly and temporarily left her station position while holding her cell phone. She walked a little further and looked at the number displayed on her phone. It was a completely unfamiliar number. She didn't have many contacts on her phone. Zhangwanan's first reaction was that it might be a harassing call, so she hung up without hesitation. Just as she was about to lift her feet to walk back, her phone rang again. This time she didn't hang up, thinking she might as well pick up and listen. Hello, who's there? Zhangwanan answered the phone. The other end was silent. Zhangwanan thought she had hung up. She looked at it and saw that the call page was still on. She put the phone to her ear again and asked, "Who is that?" The other side didn't seem to be planning to speak yet. Zhangwanan looked at the time. It was almost time. She lost her patience. Just as she was about to hang up, she heard a voice coming from the other side. "Anan, it's me." Zhangwanan felt a short circuit in his mind at that moment. Wasn't this familiar voice the person they had been thinking about for a long time, the Sioran who suddenly disappeared from the world? "Sister Ran Ran, it must be you." Zhangwanan spoke with trembling lips, not a question, but an affirmative statement. "It's me," Sioran answered quickly, and this time there was no silence. Zhangwanan was excited when she heard the answer, and her heartbeat kept beating. She was glad that she picked up this unfamiliar number. "Where have you been?" Zhangwanan smiled, suppressing her excitement and forgetting to even start checking her scores in 2 minutes. "It's a long story, I'll tell you tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Zhangwanan was confused. "I'll be at your house tomorrow morning," Sioran said. At that moment, Zhangwanan's smile suddenly widened. Luzes, who had been observing her there. He didn't know whose call made her so excited. Anyway, he was very unhappy. He raised his hand to look at the time and called out, "Anan." Zhangwanan over there ignored him. I don't know if he didn't hear him or if he was having a good conversation with the person on the other end of the phone and ignored him. "What time will you come?" "Around 9 o'clock," Sioran said. "Okay, I'll wait for you. I'll call Gu Jinchu here. He misses you too." Although Zhangwanan was excited, she didn't forget the point. For a while, Gu Jinchu often came to her house and often mentioned Sioran. Sioran smiled on the other end of the phone. She really understood her, but she still told her, "Don't tell him." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 526. Chapter 526 Double Happiness. Sioran smiled on the other end of the phone. She really understood her, but she still told her, "Don't tell him." "Understood," surprised Jongwanan smiled slyly. "I wanted to say something more, but it was too late." Sioran seemed very busy, so she said see you tomorrow and hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Jongwanan felt that her mood had improved a lot. She walked happily for a few steps, not knowing how to calm down her mood at the moment. Without paying attention, a pair of hands suddenly grabbed her wrist. The grip was firm and even a little painful. Jongwanan's smile froze for a moment. When she looked over, she saw that it was Luzes who looking at her with an unhappy face. "It's time to check your scores, you know," he asked coldly. Jongwanan said and glanced at the phone. 7 minutes had passed. Then he looked at the three people squatting next to the computer. It seemed that they hadn't found it yet. "I'll go there right now," Jongwanan said, lifting his legs and walking that way. Before he could even take a step out, Luzes who pulled him back. "Who called you? So happy?" Jongwanan was stunned. It turned out that his face was so ugly because he was jealous. He was really a jealous person and could be knocked over at any time. He was helpless. She was about to say something, but as soon as Luzes who said it was time to check her scores, her mind got confused and she was ready to run over there, forgetting to explain. "It's Sioran, Sister Ran," Jongwanan said. "Sioran," Luzes who was obviously stunned for a moment, and while speaking, he held Jongwanan's hand hard and loosened his grip a little. "Well, I was surprised when I got the call just now. It's coming tomorrow. Please invite Gu Jinshu over," Jongwanan said. "Well, you didn't tell me why you disappeared for so long," Luzes who responded and asked again. "I didn't say it. It's a long story. I'll tell it at home tomorrow," Jongwanan explained. After understanding the situation, Luzes who nodded, his face not so ugly, but Jongwanan felt a little pain in her wrist. This guy was extremely strong and unreasonable. He grabbed his wrist violently and turned red. Jongwanan complained silently. Jongwanan ran to the computer again with excitement and joy, thinking that tonight would definitely be a double happiness. The results were finally checked out about 3 minutes later. The whole family craned their necks to look over. The total score was 710. The family cheered together instantly. Well, the results were as expected, as good as ever. Although it was expected, I still breathed a long sigh of relief after seeing it. Luzes who also saw the results on the screen. He said, "I told you not to worry. I expected it." There was a little bit of pride and confidence, but Jongwanan liked this about him. Without saying a word, he jumped over and pulled Luzes who down a little, leaving a soft W on his cheek. Luzes who was caught off guard and was stunned. "Reward," she whispered in Luzes who's ear. The three adults hadn't gone out yet, and they were already happy. After seeing this scene, they became even happier. They couldn't help but laugh out loud. Jongwanan was so excited that she forgot that there were 3 adults around. She blushed instantly. Without saying anything, she fell into Luzes who's arms and hid her blushing face. Luzes who smiled brightly when he saw her embarrassment. He didn't know whether it was because the results were so funny or because he was gloating about Jongwanan's embarrassment. Probably the latter. Since they had already eaten, after checking the results, the family opened a bottle of good wine that Lulin had collected for a long time. Except for Jongwanan, they all drank a little less, so they regarded it as a celebration. "Luzes who, you can go to the school you want to go to," Jongwanan said as the two of them walked in the garden. She felt a little uncomfortable when she said this, probably because Luzes who was leaving. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 527. Chapter 527 Talk about the future. She felt a little uncomfortable when she said this, probably because Luzes was leaving. Luzes didn't say much, and just said softly. Knowing that the little girl was reluctant to leave, he left, but now he was at a loss for words and didn't know what to say, so he had to remain silent. Double happiness tonight, let's not talk about this. Jongwanan knew that the topic could not be continued, so he took the initiative to change the subject. Okay, what do you want to say? Under the moonlight, Luzes eyes looked particularly gentle when he looked at Jongwanan. Talk about the future, Jongwanan said and sat down on the rocking chair. Luzes saw her sit down and naturally walked to the back and stood still, pushing her gently. Jongwanan closed her eyes and quietly enjoyed the feeling of the moonlight falling down, enjoying the gentleness and patience given by Luzes. We will definitely still be together in the future, and our heads will grow old, Jongwanan said with her eyes closed, as if she was thinking about the future with her eyes closed. Luzes felt his heart warm when he heard her words. He smiled and said, "Nonsense." Jongwanan couldn't help laughing when she heard these two words, and joked, "You are willing to listen to nonsense?" Luzes smiled, "Right. This little girl talks a lot of nonsense in a day, but he can still listen to it. Cherish the present. After a while, when he goes to Nanda, no one will be around him mumbling a bunch of nonsense. Even if there is such a person, he will not be willing to listen. We will definitely have our own little home in the future," Luzes said. "That must be true," Jongwanan said. Luzes heard Jongwanan mutter these words, but the voice was not very clear. He lowered his head to look at the person in the rocking chair and found that she had fallen asleep holding onto one of the armrests. Luzes was speechless. He didn't know who it was that wanted to talk about the future. But as a result, he fell asleep without saying a word. He thought for a while and stopped wandering. He went around to the side and picked up Jongwanan and walked towards the house. It was easy to catch a cold if she fell asleep outside. She didn't know who would take care of her as much as possible when he went to Nanda. Luzes sighed helplessly again. Besides being helpless, he was helpless. It would be nice if the two of them were 1 or 2 years apart in age or the same age. But this thing is not something they can decide. I hope that after he goes to Nanjing University, his parents can be less busy with work and take more care of Jongwanan. Going back to the room and settling Jongwanan in place, Luzes called Gu Jinshu and asked him to come over. Luzes knew that his father and mother were going out to play again, so he lured Gu Jinshu over this time with the idea of eating together. "I have to go tomorrow even if you don't ask me out," Gu Jinshu said weakly on the other end of the phone. Luzes said softly and then asked, "Going out to play again?" Gu Jinshu, who was on the other end of the phone, sat up on the sofa and said, "The results were so good that I couldn't help myself and went out to play ball for a while." This method of celebration is quite unique. The two of them talked a few more words about today's results before hanging up the phone. Luzes kept silent about Sioran's arrival tomorrow. Gu Jinshu was also kept in the dark and simply wanted to have a meal tomorrow. Meal. * Next day. Maybe Gu Jinshu was very active when it came to eating. He came here around 7:30 and shouted that he was hungry as soon as he walked in. Lu Lin and Lin 11, who happened to be going to work, were having breakfast. When they heard him shouting, they quickly called him over. "Have a meal. Look at the food for the hungry children," Lin 11 said with distress as she watched him wolfing down the food. Gu Jinshu smiled hee and said something like, "I'm used to it." "Where are they to? Are they still sleeping?" Gu Jinshu asked, slurring his words. "Here, we're down." Lu Lin raised his chin and pointed in the direction of the stairs. Gu Jinshu turned around and saw the two people. Not to mention, if you look closely, they looked like a couple. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 528. Chapter 528. Long time no see. Gu Jinshu turned around and saw the two people. Not to mention, if you look closely, they looked like a couple. Hey, come here and eat, Gu Jinchu waved to the two of them, as if he was afraid that they wouldn't see him. The two of them glanced at him and walked over. Why did it feel like Gu Jinchu was the host and they were the guests? The two of them were generous and didn't care too much. They walked over and sat down to eat. Lin 11 and Lu Lin got up to go to work after eating. Suddenly there were only three of them left at the dining table. The three of them looked at me and I looked at you, each of them was silent. After a while, Gu Jinchu was also full. He lazily leaned back in his chair and said in a casual tone, "I'm full, you continue." The two of them rolled their eyes at him. They really regarded themselves as their masters. More than 10 minutes later, Zhang Wanan and Lu Zizhu also finished eating. They wiped their mouths gracefully and stood up. No one ignored Gu Jinchu and treated him as if he didn't exist. Gu Jinchu was confused when he saw the two people's attitudes, but he didn't ask the reason. Maybe it was because they didn't sleep, he thought. When someone knocks on the door later, remember to open the door. As soon as Gu Jinchu sat down on the sofa and his was still hot, he heard Lu Zizhu's sudden words. "Why? I am a guest." He recognized his own clearly at this time. Lu Zizhu said "Huh" and didn't bother to explain. He asked him to open the door to give him a surprise. This guy was not happy yet. Gu Jinchu waited for a while and Lu Zizhu didn't say anything. He simply didn't wait anymore. He was too high last night and didn't sleep well. It's not too late now. Why not close his eyes for a while and think about him? He found a comfortable position to lie down and close his eyes. Blinded. He couldn't hear the doorbell. After sleeping for a while, Zhang Wanan looked at him and said worriedly. Lu Zizhu also took a look and said unceremoniously, "Kick him up. He's not asleep yet, okay? Can't you speak a little lower and hide it from him?" He originally wanted to ask why he was asked to open the door and who was coming, but sleep came too quickly and he fell asleep without even asking a single word. He woke up while swaying. If he hadn't been sober, he would have thought he was sitting on a drifting boat. He opened his eyes and found that it was Zhang Wanan shaking him. Lu Zizhu stood aside and looked at him condescendingly, ready to kick him. "What for?" he muttered dissatisfiedly. "Here they come, open the door," Lu Zizhu said. Gu Jinchu pricked up his ears and listened carefully. Sure enough, there was a doorbell ringing. He squinted his eyes and sat up to avoid being kicked. He muttered and complained as he walked, "I don't know who insisted on opening the door for me. What a shame." Zhang Wanan laughed softly when he heard his complaints. He knew who he was after a while and had absolutely no regrets. Gu Jinchu muttered all the way to the door. When he was a few steps away, he said impatiently, "Here we come, don't press the button." His voice was loud, and people outside probably heard it. Sure enough, he didn't push the button again, and just stood quietly waiting for the door to open. But the process of waiting for the door to open was painful, and the familiar voice made her heart beat restlessly. Gu Jinchu reached out and opened the door. He originally wanted to open the door and leave with a look on his face, but before he could walk away, he caught a glimpse of the person standing at the door. At that moment, his mind went blank. He thought it was a dream. He rubbed his eyes and looked over again. He found that the person at the door was looking at him with a smile on his face. He pinched his thigh hard. It hurt. It was not a dream. "Xia, Xiaoran." The moment he called out his name, he thought he was in a dream. He was in a trance and didn't want to believe it. "It's me, long time no see." Xiaoran stood at the door and smiled. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 529. Chapter 529. I miss you so much. It's me, long time no see. Sioran stood at the door and smiled. Gu Jinchu's eyes widened. It was really Sioran. She had lost weight and disappeared for so long. She didn't know what she had gone through. He reacted and called out to the two people in the living room with a loud ouch. As soon as he finished speaking, the two people had already exposed their heads, with playful smiles on their faces. Gu Jinchu instantly understood that they already knew about it, so no wonder they asked him to open the door. Let Sister Ran Ran come in. Zhang Wanan couldn't help but remind her as she looked at the stunned Gu Jinchu. At this moment, Gu Jinchu realized that he was so surprised and dazed that he forgot to invite the people in. Gu Jinchu hurriedly made way for Sioran to come in. Sioran smiled at him and walked in, and was then hugged by the little girl Zhang Wanan. Long time no see, Zhang Wanan said, hugging Sioran. Sioran didn't say anything and hugged the little girl gently. Long time no see, I miss you very much. After hugging each other for a while, the two separated and the group of people walked towards the living room. Gu Jinchu couldn't hold it back. Before he even reached the living room, he couldn't wait to ask what he wanted to ask. Why did you disappear suddenly? I can't get through the phone either. Sioran turned to look at him and found that Gu Jinchu was also turning to look at her. She quickly turned back and said, there is something. She only said 4 words and then said nothing more. Gu Jinchu thought she didn't want to say anything, so he nodded and didn't ask any more questions. We'll talk about it later, Sioran added. Gu Jinchu breathed a sigh of relief inexplicably. He could still speak. He thought he would stop talking after just saying 4 words. It was fine that he could still speak. He wanted to know about Sioran's situation during that time. After arriving in the living room, everyone sat down. As soon as they sat down, Zhang Wanan leaned into Sioran's ear and said something. While talking, his eyes glanced at Gu Jinchu. Gu Jinchu felt a little confused, and then he saw Sioran. He lowered his head and laughed softly. Gu Jinchu didn't know what Zhang Wanan whispered to Sioran, and was still confused. Sister Ran Ran, eat some fruit. Zhang Wanan pushed the fruit plate over. Sioran didn't eat, so she picked up the water glass and took a sip of water. Zhang Wanan didn't care and asked about the phone number. Is the phone number yesterday your new number? Well, yes, the previous number is no longer needed, that is the new number, Sioran said and took another sip of water. Then why didn't you contact me before you knew my number? Let me tell you where I went and why I didn't contact you. Sioran put down the water glass and looked at the 3 people. She knew that all 3 of them wanted to know the truth. Zhang Wanan nodded, she couldn't wait to know. Sioran's words, Gu Jinchu and Zhang Wanan were sitting upright, even more upright than they usually sat when listening to lectures, while the casual losers who sitting on one side looked out of place. He also listened, but he didn't want to sit up so straight. Sioran looked at the people who were in the state and sat down and started talking. After my parents divorced, I followed my father. I originally wanted to be alone, but my father was sick and needed my care, so I followed him. Later, I was busy with school and taking care of my father, so I didn't contact you. But I haven't forgotten you, and it's not that I don't want to answer your calls, but the phone was stolen and I didn't get a replacement number, Sioran explained in a few words. Zhang Wanan looked at her dumbfounded. That's it? She thought she would talk a lot. Yes, it's not that I don't want to contact you. It's just that I was too tired during that time. I had to take care of my father and was busy every day. I even had to work after school. I was too busy every day to have any energy, Sioran said with a bitter smile. Gu Jinchu looked at her, no wonder she had lost a lot of weight just now. She was already tall, but she looked frail due to her thinness. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 530. Chapter 530, this period of time has been very difficult. Gu Jinchu looked at her, No wonder she had lost a lot of weight just now. She was already tall, but she looked frail due to her thinness. Sioran explained some more, and Jongwanan listened to every word. Sioran had a very hard time. She didn't live a good life after following Xiaodong, because Xiaodong was sick and had been living in the hospital. Half of his money was given to Sioran's mother, and the other half was for the parents' daily expenses and medical treatment. Medical treatment costs a lot and money is getting less and less, so Sioran has to go to work. What now? Is uncle okay? Jongwanan asked. I'm raising him at home, and he's fine, Sioran said. Xiaodong was discharged from the hospital on the day of her college entrance examination and was gradually recovering, otherwise she would not be relieved and run to Jinchinj. That's good, Gu Jinchu said. Sioran looked at him and smiled. Gu Jinchu suddenly found that Sioran liked to laugh more and more, which was good. I don't know how a weak girl managed to survive on her own during those days. She should have called them for help, but Sioran's self-esteem did not allow her to do so. She carried everything on her own. No matter what, it would be good to get in touch again, which proves that she still has a few of their friends in her heart. After talking about a lot of heavy things, the atmosphere had to be lively, so Gu Jinchu suggested playing a game, with 4 people in a team. Sioran and Jongwanan were neither very good at playing, so Lu Zizhu and Gu Jinchu each took a rookie. There were always people beating Sioran along the way. Gu Jinchu kept standing in front of her and beating her back, while Sioran just ran away. Although it was a game, Sioran always felt good about being protected, especially being protected by Gu Jinchu. Under the protection of Lu Zizhu and Gu Jinchu, the two lived for a long time, but they failed to win in the end. However, the two people without any burdens did win in the end. The atmosphere instantly became lively after one game, and another game started without saying a word. The two girls were still protected. Because the game is so exciting, the girl always yells when she panics. For a moment, the two grown men suddenly felt that the roof was about to be lifted up by their screams. My eyes were a little tired after playing a few games, so I put down my phone and started eating and drinking again. Sioran had been working in many places during the period when she had no contact with them. After experience, she became talkative and no longer as silent as before. The whole villa was filled with the laughter of the 4 people. Sister Ran, we are going to the beach in a few days, or you can go too, Jongwanan actively invited. Yes, there are so many people and it's lively, Gu Jinchu said. Are you going to? Sioran looked at him and asked. Isn't this nonsense? How can I be left out of this kind of thing? Gu Jinchu said proudly that he was the best at eating, drinking, and having fun. Sioran thought for a while and said, go. Okay, Jongwanan shouted excitedly. There were so many people and it was great now. The people who came were all her favorites and her good friends. We are like-minded and have a lot to say. The day will definitely be exciting. Jongwanan is looking forward to it. Asterisk. Sioran was still at the Lu family's house when she filled out her application, and Gu Jinchu also came over. Sioran sat next to Gu Jinchu that day. I will go to whichever school you fill in. Our grades are almost the same anyway. Sioran said that there was only a 2-point difference in their grades, so it was okay to go to the same school. Huh, Gu Jinchu was a little stunned, obviously not understanding what she meant. Sioran was also stunned. It seemed that he had long forgotten what she said to him from the bottom of her heart when they first met, and he also forgot what he said at that time. That's right, it was the first time we met. It's been so long and I don't remember it being normal, Sioran comforted herself like this. End of this chapter.